Hey everyone, Juan here. Welcome to SQL Lingua Franca, the podcast about analytics that reveals what the documentation does not cover.
SQL Lingua Franca. Mayo.
Today, we have Thomas. He's the CEO and co-founder of Tasman Analytics, where he helps data teams in their maturity journey, especially the small ones. Today, we're going to discuss all sorts of things from the future of every type of data job to the importance of information modeling. Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for the invitation to come here. I'm Thomas. I am founder of Tasman. We are a data analytics agency. I'm from Belgium, but I'm Dutch by nationality, and I lived for a long time in the UK, so my accent hovers somewhere over the North Sea. I'm a physicist by training, but against all better intentions, I ended up in the data world about 12 years ago in London, and have never left it since. I live in the Netherlands with my New Zealand wife, a dog, one kid, another kid on the way, and I love spending time with fellow data interested people like we're doing right now.
It's exciting. We actually know each other for, what is it, like a year now?
No,
Or
more. 2 years, yeah. I think
Yes.
didn't we? Because we you asked me to speak at the first DBT meetup in Amsterdam. That's almost 2 years ago.
Yes,
Yes.
that could have been. So yes, Thomas and I co-organized the DVT meetup here in
do.
Amsterdam.
Yeah, it's the best meetup in all of Europe, obviously.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely.
For everybody listening, please come and please volunteer as a speaker.
Yes, or as an organizer, by the way, or to host
Yeah.
the events. There's no limit on how many we can organize every year, but typically we do one every 2 months, and that keeps the quality high and the hunger high as well, which is very important, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's a very nice initiative. We already have some episodes covering it. But Thomas, maybe tell me a little bit more about your company, about Tasman.
Yeah, so Tasman is a boutique agency. We specialize in working with fast-growing companies to get them to be better at data. That's quite a nice space because we typically see is when companies get started, they get away with using Google Analytics, they get away with Excel spreadsheets and so on and so on. But at some point, it needs to change. It needs to be moved up to a proper data stack, whether that's end-to-end like Amplitude or Mixpanel, or whether that is a more sophisticated stack with central data warehouse, customer data platform, and so on and so on. We specialize in doing three things there. We build the infrastructure. We build the insights already from the very start of every project. We want to make sure that this stack is not built in a vacuum, but really meant to generate business value. We can talk about it later, what that means exactly, because a lot of people talk about it, but still. And then we also help to accelerate internal teams. So the ideal client we have is a client that is really quickly growing quite quickly. The ideal client for us is a client that grows quite quickly. It is a client that is very ambitious when it comes to data-driven decision making. It's a client that also wants to hire internal data team, but realizes that you can't get there overnight. And that's the kind of company we love to help, because we come in for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, help them get set up with all the best data stack pieces out there, help them set up the insights and insights backlog that they need in order to make those decisions, and then help them find the data team as well. And so far, I've been doing that for about 55 companies over the last 6 years. Big companies, small companies, big NGOs, small startups, essentially anything that any kind of company that wants to move quickly and wants to get better at data quite quickly as well. 20 people split between the UK and the Netherlands. And we're very happy with the approach we take, which is to be very expert-driven. So we're not a classic consultancy. We don't do people on seats time of work. We come in as an interim team. That means that you get analytics engineers, data analysts, all for the price of 1 or 2 FTE, so to speak. And then we'll help you in a set of sprints to get better at data and then hand over to your internal team. And it's a really nice model. Our people love it and our clients love it as well.
Yeah, so you're essentially accelerating the data maturity of the companies that you visit.
Yeah, we allow companies to shortcut their way to good data maturity in a matter of months rather than the years it would take. Because, as I'm sure all of you who listen to this podcast know, data is not easy. The technical challenges are only one part of it. Data culture is a thing. Finding the right people in your data team is another thing. it can easily take a year before you get up to speed if you have to build a data team from scratch, and we try to accelerate that to a couple of months.
Maybe I have a theory and I'm very curious to run it by you. I think the data maturity journey of most companies starts when somebody decides to make a dashboard. Then people are like, wow, this is interesting. And then they decide they need a data scientist. The data scientist goes there. They are bored out of their mind because it's everything like Excel sheets. That person complains, they get a data engineer. That data engineer goes crazy and says, like, hey, we don't have the right infrastructure. They get a data infra person, and that infra person says, we don't have any like strategy. We need like a head of data. That whole process takes, I've seen it in as little as a year, but sometimes we're talking about decades. That's at least how I see the journey of most companies to data maturity. How do you see it, or what do you think of the one I showed?
Yeah, I think you hit upon quite a pertinent point, which is that most people, and by extension most companies, only learn by experiencing the pain of not having something firsthand, right? And the journey you're mentioning might be, it's not even that big of an exaggeration. I can point to about 5 or 6 former clients or current clients that went through that, or if only only to realize after that he needed the help of an outside party here. I think data maturity, I don't think of it as much as a team. I think of it more in terms of the decision making that you can do with your data. And I think there, the ability of stakeholders, of a CMO, of a VP product, in small companies, of a co-founder, to really operate at the speed of thought, that's a sort of gold standard, right? You want to sort of, you have an hypothesis about how your users behave in the app. Are you able to immediately pull up data that either confirms or rejects that hypothesis? That's the gold standard you want to go to. And I think most founders in small companies, they've got a good grasp of what they want from all of that. So they've got a really good high standard, and they will find the unicorn data person, data scientist, data analyst, whatever you want to call it, to help them get there. But it will be very ad hoc. So the very low data maturity for me in those companies is not the awareness of where the gold standard is, but it's the fact that they don't build for scale, they don't build for reproducibility, and they don't build for accuracy even. They just get someone who can duct tape some data from production data together and get the answer in front of the CEO quite quickly. The very mature startups and scale-ups, in our experience, and again, this is our experience of working with fast-growing companies, are companies that understand that getting the answer right the first time is only part of the problem to solve. The problem is also, how do you make sure that I don't need to run this by the analyst anymore next time I have the same question? How do we make sure that as the company grows, that I can ask the same question or slight variations of it and get most up-to-date data in my inbox every day? And those are the companies that then tend to realize they need to invest in a proper centralized data stack. They need to invest in information and data modeling. They need to invest in not just a data team that can manage all of that, but a product team that understands data well and makes data-driven decisions. So as with all startups, the maturity is in the extent to which a founder can delegate some of this decision-making and scaling to his teams.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe something interesting, what companies do you see that go much, much faster in this whole maturity journey?
Beyond, of course, the companies that choose to work with Tasman to accelerate their data maturity. I think it's companies that realize that are very technology forward are typically companies that are very data forward as well. But they typically already make quite a few investments quite early in their journey, and then they choose to stick with their end-to-end data platform, whether that's Amplitude or Mixpanel, for quite a long time. Interestingly enough, it's companies that don't make that very early end-to-end platform investment, but that, for instance, only after they raise a Series A, decide that they need a proper data platform and then build a composable architecture where you separate your data pipeline from your warehouse, from your data modeling, from your BI layer. Those are the companies that tend to then move the fastest, because that composable architecture, the modular architecture, that's the architecture you can do proper data modeling on top of. That's the architecture you can build data activation layers on top of. That's the architecture you can build your semantic BI layers on top of as well. They then also realize that they need to make an investment in not just the technology, but also the people. So they will immediately afford not just one single data unicorn person, but a data engineer, an analytics engineer, a data analyst, maybe even a head of data, as you say. So, yeah, it does come down to the team at one point, but it's the I think at the end of the day, the main differentiator is in tool and technology choices there. And there, the paradox is that the companies who wait a little bit longer to make the investments tend to be
Interesting.
more mature at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, in my experience, sometimes it's like heavily regulated industries that are tech native and not that conservative when it comes to stuff. So, for example, fintech, and especially the fintech that is not like proper banking, but maybe something a bit lighter like insurances, those ones tend to go like super fast.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, I think the quality of your backend data is a really good proxy for how mature you get in data insights. So fintech will be heavily regulated, will have very good data governance from the very start, because essentially their business is data basis one way or the other. It's just not called a database, it's a production financial backend, right? Companies that tend to have much more messy backend data, they tend to, even if they hire data people, these data people tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the technology choices to solve the messy data problems in their backend. And that holds them back from actually producing insights. The biggest example I can give there is travel companies. Travel companies, particularly travel companies that deal with ticketing data from big legacy train or airline ticketing systems. Yeah, that's very messy data. Those are systems that are 30, 40 years old.
Oh, yes.
Yes, very text-based, very sort of having to munch through a huge amount of plain text files in order to get data out of that. Those are companies that struggle really with getting to data-drivenness. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think pattern matching a little bit to what are, at the end of the day, our favorite clients, which are relatively standard e-commerce web shops, mobile subscription apps, because there's so much standardization in those industries that you can plug and play all sorts of data products on top of that already. And we've got our internal packages, of course, around attribution or subscription state analysis or rapid A/B test experimentation setups and so on, that we can deploy quite quickly on top of those environments. And that means that, these companies can get to data maturity quite quickly. Interesting. Industry is definitely a factor in how quickly they can move. I will say that very heavily regulated industries like healthcare, those are very slow companies to move, right? So it's not because you're heavily regulated. It's over the risk. Locking of data, for sure, data governance can really play against your maturity curve as well. But you just have to make a bit more of an investment to get to the point where you have got a bit more of a separation of concerns in your data models there, and so on and so on. But it's not as easy to iterate your way to data maturity there. You need to make that big investment to go from having no data whatsoever about your patients to having aggregated, privatized, aggregate data of your patients in your data warehouse.
Yeah, I also believe if automating processes or selling data are a central part of your business, that's also going to go super fast.
Yes.
In fact, probably the most mature companies I've seen are the ones that decide like, hey, we have interesting data, we should start selling it. And they somehow manage within 6 months.
If there's a commercial incentive, it always works, right? But even there, I'd say that there's a lot of companies out there that think they have interesting commercially valuable data, but it's not enough to have the data. You need to have a product around it. And I think that companies that have figured out a product around the data that they have, they will move very fast. Companies that think they're sitting on a goldmine of data but haven't really figured out what the product is, they will be very slow, because they will move in circles until someone points out that there's no commercially viable proposition there, right?
It's true. It's also like the size of your market. If somehow you're selling 1/10 of the cars in a country or something crazy like that, or being the biggest e-commerce, I think a lot of people would just buy that data. Here in the Netherlands, there is this one webpage called Funda, which is where literally every single house is listed.
Yes.
When people want to sell them. I think if they started selling their data and make it public for everybody, a lot of people will go out of business.
Because you remove the brokers of information, right? It's such an important role in this economy to essentially rely on information asymmetry to broker it and earn a living on top of that. But I think the Netherlands already does pretty well when it comes to open standards for house prices, for instance, or for you can go to the cadastre and get history of selling prices quite easily. Where in the UK, I believe this is locked in commercial data sets and so on and so on. So maybe it's already better than most countries, but I think that there's definitely a nice commercial viable proposition there. Juan, if you ever want to start a company around house prices, I'm sure we can talk to Funda and see where we get to.
Or like scrape it like most people do.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. I didn't build a scraper to buy my house. I will tell you that. But yeah, it would certainly have been possible to get the best houses delivered to your mailbox in the morning, right?
Yeah. It's funny because this scraping fund is becoming a recurring topic in this podcast.
Well, it's easier to build these days as well. But honestly, most makelaars will be able to send you an email every morning with all of the right houses in there. Anyway, it's
Yes.
true. Commercially viable data sets, those companies will move very quickly. I think that's going to be even more the case in the next couple of years because it's going to be, for me, one of the main interesting applications of large language model when it comes to data is the ability to rapidly structure what used to be unstructured data. And I think there, anything that relies on publicly available data is going to be a major see major benefits of that over the next couple of years, but also enriching currently highly structured data sets with all of this unstructured data in a more structured manner is going to be quite powerful as well. And yeah, I think you're going to see more companies figure out that, yes, they're sitting on very valuable data, but they now can also structure it and make it commercially viable, where that might not have been economical in the past.
Yeah. But I guess selling data is already way too far into the data maturity journey.
Yes, most companies don't even get there. That's very true.
Let's go a bit earlier to where your niche is. Mm-hmm. Let's say you have a company that just made their first dashboard. They're all excited about data and they contact you and they say, hey, we want to be great in data. We don't care if it's in like 1, 2, 3 years, but this is definitely a priority for the business now. Mm-hmm. And they call you. What is more or less the roadmap that you put for them?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, there's not that many companies who call us and say we want to be great at data, because that typically doesn't go hand in hand with available budget to actually get great at data. Most of the time, it's companies calling us that say we have zero visibility on our marketing campaign performance. Can you help us fix this, please? So it's really a problem-driven space, if that makes sense. And in my experience, having thought a bit about the business development side of data consultancy over the last couple of years, I think that data is really one of the most problem-driven selling spaces. Everybody wants to talk about data. Everybody wants to talk about being great at data. But the people who are happy to invest in getting greater data are people who have a very clear problem with a clear associated cost to it as well. And so if you come to me and say, I want to be great at data, the first question I have for you is, well, what are you currently unable to do that you think you need data or better data for? And then you get into quite a nice discussion about what's your North Star? What are you trying to achieve? Are you a small e-commerce website that is mostly concerned with acquiring new users? Well, that's quite a different track from if you're a more mature mobile app in subscription that just wants to make sure you increase the retention of your subscriber base, for instance. Quite a different set of tactics, quite a different set of recommendations to make. So it's really important, even if the companies look on the surface to be quite similar, to ask those very top-down questions about what is your goal as a business? Are you focused on acquisition? Are you focused on retention? In acquisition, are you focused on digital performance marketing acquisition? Is this organic? Is this more of a network-based acquisition model? And really trying to understand the drivers of your business that way. So every project we really start with that. Even if it's a CTO who reaches out to us and say, we need a database and we need this and this and this type of data on top of that, we always say, let's take a step back and give you some free strategy here if you're willing to hear it. And the most successful projects are always projects where that sort of strategic discussion really sort of unlocks a whole bunch of interesting chats about OKRs, about key results, about this quarter it's acquisition, next quarter it's about retention. This is the growth model. These are the sort of growth engine bits that we want to put in place in order to grow the business further. And then only after all of that do you make a recommendation about Snowflake or BigQuery, or relational versus data lake, or build yourself a simple data model and build a CDP that feeds data into all of that, or do you want to go to an end-to-end solution like Amplitude, right? Those are downstream from the business questions that you need to unlock first. And if there's any recommendation I can make to any data team, it is really, with the scar tissue we have over the last 6-7 years, ask those business questions, because typically people tend to solutionize before they really understand the problem very well.
So just deducing, probably the first step is making a list of all of the use cases and measuring their impact, which,
Yep.
by the way, this is not a data thing, but rather like a business.
Correct.
Maybe another thing that always like catches my attention a lot is you see on LinkedIn lots of people with barely any data experience repeating as a mantra, always think about the problem, always think about the business, where is the value of your data? Like they repeat that as a mantra.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you get very deep and very technical in data, you start internalizing that, well, data is the new oil, data is the end state, and you get so deep that it becomes a bit harder, even if you know by heart that, yes, you should think about the problem. It becomes very hard to operationalize this, know exactly how thinking about the problem looks like, and actually doing it on day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
What is some advice that you can give to very technical people that have trouble thinking along with the business and actually applying that to their day-to-day work?
Those people in big ticketing travel companies that are trying to build custom pipelines for ticketing systems. Yeah. Now I think what is the advice I'd give to very technical data people to get better at understanding the priorities of the business? I'll say two things. First of all, water cooler conversations with your business stakeholders, right? Don't underestimate the value of just talking to your VP of product, to your marketing officers, because you get a feeling for what they think about and what their day-to-day problems are like. And I can guarantee you that that you immediately think about 5 or 6 different data applications that would really help them solve those problems straight away. And that's at the end of the day very much a problem-driven approach. But it's very ad hoc still. So maybe a more structured way of thinking about this is, certainly if you're starting out in a data team as a very technical person, you've got a lot of goodwill in a company, and a lot of people would really like to make time for you to talk to you about their job. So talk to 10, 15, 20 different stakeholders. Start with your C-level if they have time for you, particularly in a small company. Use the fact that it's such a flat structure, and just try to understand what is your priority over the next 3 months, over the next 6 months. The CEO might say, oh, it's acquiring new users. The CMO might say it is reducing customer acquisition costs by 25%. The CPO, the product officer, might say it is increasing funnel completion rate for onboarding by 15% because I know I can increase customer retention that way, and so on and so on. Map those essentially key results out on a sheet of paper or on a whiteboard or Miro or whatever, and then start to think about, well, what data sources do I need in order to create this piece of insight here, and prioritize those pieces of insights and those KPIs that these business leaders will tell you about. Don't try and work your way bottom up to those KPIs in the way you think that are useful, but really try and understand it from their point of view first. That's the very simple advice I'd give there. And then in terms of prioritization, because if you ask 20 people in the company what their data priorities are, you're going to get 20 different answers. Yeah. So how do you prioritize that? There's frameworks to help you with that, right? There is there's a couple of them. The simplest one, and the one that we use at Tasman for our prioritization of backlog stories that we help our clients build, is we look at the business value. We can quantify that. Maybe that's a cost that business is currently having by not having a piece of insight. Maybe that's extra value you can unlock by a particular piece of insight. If that is helping your marketing team decrease customer acquisition cost by 10%, that might have quite a large business value, because reducing that by 10% might mean that you can run more campaigns and therefore get more users into your mobile app or into your website, and therefore make more money at the end of the day. There are ways to quantify that. Your stakeholders will help you with that. And then also quantify the complexity of building this. And certainly if you've been working in a team for a few weeks or months already, you know what data sources are readily available, what data first need to be modeled, quantify the complexity of all of that, and then prioritize your stories on the back of all of that. It will always be a little bit sort of a guesstimate, and you have to use judgment in these different things. But no one will blame you for doing the wrong thing if you've extensively consulted people about what they want to see from the data team and trying to build that. The other bit of advice I'd give, because if you've managed to prioritize your data stories accurately, you know what the business value is for each story, you know what the complexity is, you know how to prioritize all of that. You know maybe what the reach of a data story is as well. Is it just one single person? Is it just Joe in the marketing team? Or is this a piece of insight that will find its way to everybody thinking about business growth, right? Have that in there as well. But once you've done that, also understand that particularly in fast-moving organizations, you need to get early feedback or you fail. So rather than spend 3-4 weeks building the perfect version of the dashboard that you've designed for your CMO, get a rough version together in a few days, get it in front of them and say, is this what you're looking for? The sort of the worst thing you can do in these organizations is to go away for a long period of time, build something that you think is perfect, but that then turns out to be completely missing the point of what the CMO actually needs. And you're not going to get that point from one discussion. It needs to be an iterative process where you change the approach, where you change the graph structure a little bit, where you also show your stakeholder what's actually possible with the data that they have, because they might not know that at first. They might need to be shown what you can do with it. Yeah, absolutely. So it's the combination of prioritize according to business value complexity, and then make sure you iterate. And that's the secret to activation. It's to make sure that you assume you need at least 2 or 3 iterations of every data product that you build and deliver.
For sure. Does it also happen that you get stuck in what I call project hell? When like you follow those recommendations, you start iterating quickly, asking for feedback, and then you realize that you have been implementing feedback like almost every day for maybe months.
Yeah, and that you don't get any time for writing your data models properly, for instance. Yeah, absolutely. So therein lies, I think, if you go back to the idea of data maturity, I think that's really the point where you need a strong data lead in your team. That doesn't necessarily have to be an experienced head of data. That can be the data analyst, for instance, taking ownership of everything that goes out to the business. But a strongly opinionated lead in the data team that can say, no, now we're going to spend 20% of our time building the data models from scratch because they're not scalable, and we're going to win so much more efficiency by just doing this for a couple of weeks over here. Project Hell, I mean, I don't really think most data teams are still in a position where they're just executing tickets that are filed with them. I think most organizations know that is not the best way to deal with the data team. But I do think that the situation that you described, where you just end up iterating and sort of keep making small changes, that is definitely reality for a lot of teams. And at that point, I'd say feel confident in pushing back and saying, well, actually now we need to focus on these other high priorities before we can get back to you. And assume that there's diminishing returns of every iteration as well, right? So assume you need at least 2 or 3 iterations to get to a proper, usable, relevant, business valuable dashboard or report or deep piece of insight, but then assume that any subsequent iteration is not going to add that much value anymore beyond that.
That's true. I think one of those professional moments that I feel the most proud of was when I was asked to create a data set in Databricks, and they just wanted they wanted to see how the important holidays of the year transpire minute by minute. As in, like, how many clients were in the webpage at a certain moment on a minute-to-minute basis, just to understand capacity and some stuff, and even employees that they need to hire. And when I made an estimate of how much that data set was going to cost, I'm like, hey, we're talking about something nuts, like hundreds a day. Do you really think you're going to get more than, I don't know, 30,000 a year for in terms of strategic value for this data set? And ultimately they'll realize, like, yeah, you know what, the data set is going to be a lot more expensive than whatever strategic or tangible value we're going to get out of these insights.
Yeah, good for you. That's a good pushback that you can do there, right? But that, of course, is a scenario where you can easily quantify the value of it, right? But maybe if it's not that easy to quantify the value of the data product you're building, maybe that's an answer on its own as well, right? If it doesn't really meaningfully contribute to the visibility of the CEO, so to speak, or it doesn't really meaningfully move the needle, or the insights for moving the needle for the marketing team or the product team, then why are you doing it in the first place? And differentiating, that comes with experience, I think, as well. Differentiating between vanity insights and actual business valuable insights. Yeah, it's a skill that you pick up after a while. Yeah.
It also depends on a lot of things. For example, if your core business is, I don't know, if you're Domino's and you sell pizza, just sending one campaign email can see a big spike of people just ordering pizza. But if you sell things like a fridge or a car, which are things that people don't do impulsively, it's a bit harder to notice what's the value of the actions that you're taking, because there's a lot more effort needed to get something done, like to get a sale.
Yeah, correct. And I think that relative effort reach, also the confidence you have in your ability to get to an accurate, useful result, right? So there's other frameworks. I think there's a RICE framework, which is reach, impact, confidence, and ease, right? You can there's different ways of quantifying the relative complexity and the value of something and the priority of something, right? So work out whatever way works for you. If you're still starting out as a data team, I am 100% sure there will be 5 or 6 big low-hanging pieces of fruit that are very easy to deliver but really move the needle for your company, whether that is aggregate lifetime value estimates on a week-by-week cohort level for a subscription-type business, whether that is average order value by segment for an e-commerce business. I mean, all of those things are so important.
Lifetime value of a customer, things like that.
Lifetime value of a customer. Compare that to customer acquisition cost. Do it on a cohort-by-cohort pivot rather than on a day-by-day pivot, and already you are golden in the eyes of the marketing team because they might not have that insight in a small growing company. Also, folks, please use your resources that are at your disposal these days. The fact that you can just fire up ChatGPT or Claude and just ask about, hey, in this particular subscription business, what are common KPIs or levers to improve this business? I mean, it will tell you, and it will actually probably have a better result than you're going to get from your internal teams, or at least an easier to digest result.
No, for sure. And also, like, you can say, hey, I'm planning to do some sort of client segmentation. I have these 3 columns. Of course, maybe don't feed it the actual data. Can you give me the SQL code of how this will look like? And
the pseudocode, the SQL code.
Yes.
Can you help me write the Python code that writes its proper segmentation of customers here? And it will make you so fast. And that speed, don't use it necessarily to do 10 times more data products than you're currently doing, but use it to iterate faster, right?
Yeah.
So spend your time on the same high priority 5 data products you've identified, but rather than but make sure you iterate them faster and get the results in front of your stakeholders in a quicker way using the modern tools.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I personally have gotten much worse at lead coding nowadays because it's like,
maybe too.
can you calculate the last Friday of a month? I'm like, yeah, maybe, but ChatGPT can do it faster, so let's go.
Can indeed, absolutely. It's we're thinking about how to sort of make these tools more relevant to analysis as well, right? Because I think people are using them as great co-pilots for data engineering work and for data modeling work. And I'll be honest, I think I use it all the time. I want to sort of try and understand what a very complex SQL query is actually trying to do. But where it really shines for me is its world's context and the fact that it can really give you great assistance in doing analysis properly. And that's not about technology necessarily. It's about what are different hypotheses that I can formulate here in order to understand why lifetime value of a sudden dropped in this particular context in this subscription company. Yeah, it's nice. It's very nice. And you don't have to feed it any data or business confidential context for that. It can just do it from a pure theoretical train of thought, which is quite powerful.
Yeah, just with a big description of what columns you have and what they do. It should be fine.
Even that. And I think thinking about knowledge maps, thinking about one of the things that we do for all of our clients is part of that initial business analysis around trying to understand what are you trying to achieve as a business and so on and so on, is we build a map of the business called a domain model map. It sketches out all the entities and objects that you have in your business, users, transactions, products, invoices sent, deliveries made, and so on and so on. That already gets you very close to a full knowledge map about all the different pieces of context in the business. You can feed that into a large language model as primary context for the business questions that you can ask on top of that. If you have that, and if you then also build a map to the schemas in a data warehouse, there's no reason why your large language model can't help you write SQL queries quite quickly on top of analysis questions that you have. And again, it will make you more efficient. It won't replace analysts, but it will make you a heck of a lot more efficient in getting to business value quickly.
Thomas, before we started recording, you mentioned something really interesting, and that is that talking about analysts, you believe that in the coming years, the role of an analyst is going to change a lot.
Yes, yeah.
Would you like to elaborate more on that?
I think it's important to realize that we are really in a very interesting period in analytics, in software engineering in general, right? But in analytics is that interface between engineering and business, where the main bottleneck used to be the availability of data. At the moment, the main bottleneck, I think, is information modeling and the ability to take raw data and structure it into something you can run analysis on. I think that bottleneck is going to disappear. So as an analyst, your job is going to change from primarily working on relational, well-structured data sets that you then build simple reporting on top of, which, let's be honest, is the job of most analysts in most data teams at this point. And it's going to have to change to be much more deep hypothesis analysis-driven work. And what that means is, as an analyst, I think you are at your very best when you have a very clear idea of what the business needs, and that's not something that is going to easily be replaced or automated, or not necessarily from a capability point of view, but from a responsibility point of view, or from an ownership point of view. You will always need an analyst in the team to tell you what's actually important in terms of insights and what's less important in terms of insights. But the way that you build those insights, you're going to have to assume that self-service BI, that the rapid availability of ad hoc insights developed by large language models, which you can already do. You can feed a CSV into ChatGPT. Don't do that, by the way, people, because first talk to your legal teams before you do that. But you can feed a CSV into ChatGPT, and it can give you all the main trends and correlations and so on it sees from there. That's what I would call it superficial analysis. That's going to be automated more and more, and you're going to still do it, but you're going to be much faster and more efficient and need less resources to do it. What's going to be more and more and more important is to actually understand what type of insights you need for making particular decisions, and then really trying to go deep into understanding the insights that you deliver. So in a way that, if you think about it 40, 50 years ago, before the advent of Excel or good statistical computer packages, statisticians used to use slide rules and logarithmic tables and so on to do most of their analysis. And of course, the advent of Excel and computerized analysis software means that our job got 10, 20, 30 times more efficient. It's not that we need less statisticians at the moment, but they just started doing different things. They started thinking more about rapid provision of simple slice and dice reporting and so on and so on. In the same way, I think you're going to see that analysts will focus a lot more on different types of analysis in the next couple of years. Analysis that's not possible at the moment, like we used the example of unstructured data earlier. Right now, an analyst is limited by the availability of the data that's structured in the data model. That's going to change to an analyst being able to very rapidly pull up all sorts of unstructured data and include it in their analysis, and not make it a sort of duct tape together, very ad hoc affair, but make it scalable, make it robust, make it reproducible. All things that are very hard and very labor intensive in a pre-large language model world. And on the other side of the spectrum, I think data engineering is going to be much more important as well, because at the end of the day, if you think about the future of LLMs in data as being agents or large language model instances that are quite tailored and have quite business-specific context, someone's going to build the data that is fed into those large language models. You're still going to need structured data sets, if only to align on particular business definitions and business logic and those user or financial invoice definitions that you would otherwise not get. And that's a data engineering job at the end of the day. And analytics engineering, but I think there's probably a discussion to be had about information modeling and how that's going to evolve as well. So a lot of change, nothing new in terms of the fact that this industry has changed a lot over the last 10 years as well.
Yeah.
But get great at deep analysis is my advice to analysts.
So I might be deducing this, but it sounds to me that you say that analysts are going to become more like business analysts, and using data is going to become a bit more trivial as a technical skill, because it's going to be easier, so people can really focus on business analysis.
Yeah, and that's great news, by the way. It's really great news. At Tasman, the reason we work with small companies is because we believe that every company has a right to have access to sophisticated data analysis to make better decisions. And these large language model evolutions will democratize that even more, right? It will make a data team of one person much more efficient and effective in producing insights than they ever were before. And that's really quite exciting, because, as I'm sure all of you in data teams have seen, once you provide a few pieces of insightful analysis, it's not that your stakeholders go like, okay, I'm done now, I've got all the data I need. No, they start to ask 10 more questions about their data set. So there is enough analysis work to be done. Most data teams I know, maybe different for you, but most data teams I know are already overworked and have a backlog of hundreds of items of analysis they need to do. This will speed this up. This will really help them get that analysis to their stakeholders faster, with more business value, with a better understanding of what actually moves the needle, and really help them in their job. And that's really quite exciting.
Yeah. So you also see that there's going to be a shift. If I had to guess, what's going to be the near future is there is going to be a lot of people working in the infrastructure
Yeah.
and also the DevOps side of data,
Yeah.
just essentially enabling all sorts of people to work with data from a higher up level. And I think I agree with you on the whole business analysts are going to become more prevalent. But I also believe companies are going to start hiring much more librarians
Yeah, absolutely.
and people that are more able to gather that knowledge, to interview people, to write things down, more journalists even. Because, yeah, like you mentioned, all of that information would be super interesting to feed it properly to an LLM.
Yeah, I really like that. So, do you think being a good writer is going to be even more important than it ever was in companies?
We actually had an episode with somebody that studied journalism. I don't think necessarily being a good writer, but being really good at documentation is going to become more important.
Well, what about storytelling?
I've never been a massive fan of the concept of storytelling.
Oh, interesting.
Just-
Why not? I'm surprised.
Because and don't get me wrong, I've built hundreds of dashboards in my life.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I get close to 1,000, but maybe. I've also even delivered some data storytelling courses. But I think on the one hand, data storytelling is like a buzzword that a lot of people just use and they just assume that it's true. And then I also feel they use it a lot to push their agendas.
Yeah.
I say, like, you
there's
can
a
always
narrative fallacy for sure.
inject a lot of emotion into whatever, and then people will take it more seriously and stuff. And every time that you hear somebody talking about data storytelling, they always paint it as like, yeah, but you need this so that people pay attention to your data or something. But I also see some beauty in keeping things as, let's say, objective as possible, as like remove the emotions from it, remove the storytelling, and just let the things that are important to people speak up without any of the distractions. So yes, it's nice, especially in the realm of data art, or if you really are trying to push people directly to your cause. Yeah, sure, use it. But I also see a lot of value in staying away from as much storytelling as possible and let people see what they need to see and not what you want them to see.
Yes, it's interesting because the sort of saying that popped up in my head where you were saying that is, let me see the raw data, and I always make my conclusions on the raw data, by which most people mean the sort of unfiltered, unstory-told set of dashboards that they want to look at. But you and I know that even the production of dashboards is already a selection of metrics and dimensions that you make in order to tell a particular story or answer a particular analysis question. And in there, I think understanding the value of great communication and understanding what you're trying to achieve as a business is going to be important. And you might not call it storytelling because you're not really writing a narrative that has all the fallacies built into that and so on and so on, but you are making selections about what's the chart you're going to put at the top of your dashboard, what are the three numbers you're going to call out at the top of the dashboard. And those might be very objective. Those might be the result of the metrics tree that you built. Those might be the results of the business analysis that you've done about, hey, this is your KPI as a CEO to work on. But still, it's a very interesting point of view.
I mean, it's also a very deep rabbit hole, because if we continue going through it, like, it always pisses me off when people say, like, oh, without data, you're just somebody with an opinion. It's like, yes, but you're assuming that data is 100% objective. But even the person that made the decision of what data to capture and how, that already was subjective. And there is nothing about this process that is like objective or like necessarily much better than an opinion.
Yes. Now I understand why we need more journalists in this field, because I think they make excellent analysts and they understand very well that every news selection is an opinion, is a subjective effort that you make, and it's about balancing that one way or the other.
Yeah, and it has never been priority, but now I think mostly thanks to LLMs, if companies start prioritizing gathering all of their internal knowledge, like all of the pieces of documentation, all of the research that they have conducted, all of the, especially like the knowledge that is inside of people's heads. Sometimes they call it tribal knowledge. If somebody focuses on gathering all of that and feeding it to some sort of LLM,
Yeah.
I think that's going to pay off exponentially in the near future.
I think so too. And I think that's why I'm talking about knowledge maps earlier and being able to create great knowledge maps about particular business context. And that could be someone who's really good at interviewing people. We already see it when we start projects. It's mostly either myself or my co-founder who does all the initial interviews, because you need to be really good at asking questions of business stakeholders in order to really try and understand what they mean, rather, or what they intend, rather than what they say as well, right? And being able to, I think as an analyst, if you're great at asking questions, if you're great at listening, if you're great at communicating, the synthesis of all of that, you're always going to be one step ahead, I think, of just a very sort of narrow scope engineer as a background, for instance.
Do you have maybe some example for people to be able to?
So we use a very agile methodology to sort of do our interview gathering, and I mean it sounds trivial, but at the end of the day, data products really opened our eyes to the language of data products. Really opened our eyes to using product design elements in data as well. So you start really looking at the different groups of people who consume the insights, and then start to understand, okay, well, as a marketer, I want to be able to see the lifetime value per acquired cohort, per week of acquired cohort, in order to rapidly adjust campaign spending based on performance, something like that, right? So just a simple sentence construction that you can use to understand who needs this, what do they need, and why do they need it, so then can not just prioritize it, but also can try and understand how much this is overlap with other stakeholder requests and so on and so on. That then for us feeds straight away into product briefings, where we build the scope and spec of a data product. And a product briefing will result in, this is the data we need, this is the technical analysis we need to do in order to understand the modeling that's necessary here, and these are the charts and graphs and insight we need to build to achieve all of this. But you have a very rigorous process that starts with that. Who are you targeting? What do they need, and why do they need it? And if you follow that as a structure, I think you're going to learn a lot about the business, and people are going to be very grateful that someone from the data team is trying to understand their intentions and their needs. In order to get to proper verbalization of who you're talking to, what they need, and why they need it, that's a bit of an art, I'm afraid, right? It's about listening. It's a bit about experience as well of similar problems that you might have solved in other companies or have seen in other contexts. But again, large language models and world models will really help you get to the bottom of what are the common problems in subscription businesses. As in these things are not rocket science. You can really get to the bottom of them yourself by doing your research, and that has never been easier than it is right now. And then ask the questions about what are the 3 things you currently can't do? What are the if you could wave a magic wand, well, what's the one chart that you want to look at every morning before starting your work? It's those questions, because they really invite people to start ideating. You never act on the first response to that, right? It's the starting point of a discussion about, well, you say that you want to see lifetime value on a week-by-week cohort basis, but are you not actually interested in lifetime value by week and by acquisition source? So maybe there's an attribution model that needs to be brought into here as well. And at that point, you've got them hooked, so to speak, right? You can have a discussion on the back of this as well. Yeah. But that's a business analysis. And you're absolutely right that in order to be successful as an analyst in this world, you need to have notions of business analysis. Absolutely.
It's quite interesting, because I think if I would ask these questions to a lot of other people in the data world, they generally would go deeper towards like technology this, technology that. But it seems to me that what you mentioned as your secret sauce is really just being good at project management.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. I think maybe that's reductive, but I don't think it is. I think it's a very good. At the end of the day, a good project will have a very clear intent. It will have a very clear scope. It will have a very clear definition of what success looks like as well. And please do that in your internal data teams as well. You almost need to consider yourself to be an internal consultant with a limited budget to do the things you need to do, and assume that you need to convince the rest of the company that you are worth expanding, for instance, or worth keeping in some cases as well. Yeah, and good project management is a very good example of that. But I would say product management. I wouldn't say necessarily project management on its own.
Yeah, it's hard to look for those labels, but indeed, it's just I've worked in the past with some really good project managers, and things like having very clear strategy, very well defined
Yeah.
roles, expectations, having a very nice and tidy Jira board.
Yes. We use
That-
Monday, but that's fine.
Yeah, hopefully you don't use Jira, but yeah, also that everybody is always kept up to date with every single thing, kept on the loop.
Yes.
So those are quite a lot of things that really can elevate a lot of the data work.
Oh yes, absolutely. Oh
But
yes. I think two thoughts on the back of that. So first of all, the technology will be commoditized if it's not already. If you see just two examples, the explosion of BI tools over the last couple of years. You can really take your pick. Do you want a strong semantic layer type of tool? Great, you got a few really good options there. Do you want a tool that is much more focused on consuming from one big tables where you do most of the modeling? Great, you got 6 great options there as well. Do you want a tool that does self-serve with NLP? Fantastic, you got really great options there as well. And that differentiation is really good for at least the businesses we work with that are not locked into 5-year contracts with their existing tool, right? But in this, you're going to see that commoditization for data modeling as well. You're going to see competitors arising to the DBT way of doing things. You're gonna have you're already seeing, I think, the effect of the arms race between Snowflake and Databricks in the amount of features that they launch every single week. This is phenomenal, right? Most of the applications of large language models in data engineering are already out of the box supported at the moment in Snowflake and Databricks with simple UIs on the back of it, and I'm so excited about all of that. Whether it's Snowflake being able to just query hundreds or thousands of PDF documents with handwritten content in there and just structure the information into a relational table in a matter of hours. It will be expensive, but it will be possible, and it wasn't possible a year or 2 years ago. The second point I want to make is that as an analyst, and as a sort of keeper of context, you got to make sure that you think about hypotheses as well. So don't let your business sort of ask you, tell me something interesting about this data set. So exploratory data analysis, I've always been very bearish on it. I've never really loved it in a way. Exploratory data analysis is great to start trying to understand the structure of the data, but don't expect it to pop out all of a sudden with amazing insights. You need hypotheses in order to do great analysis, particularly great deep analysis. Become great if you as an analyst, if you get great at formulating hypotheses. An hypothesis is, are our users more likely to convert to pro if they have seen these 2 product pages? That's an hypothesis. That's a yes or no question, right? If you get great at formulating these hypotheses, and it will take time, it will take experience, and it will take a lot of talking with the other business teams, then the sky's the limit as an analyst, because at that point you can produce great, novel, actionable analysis that you couldn't have done with simple exploratory data analysis or reporting.
Yeah. So that means also, hopefully, for those of you that are planning to do that, also get very familiar with inferential statistic and real-world research.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And again, large language models are your friend here. You can get great at that very quickly. It's incredibly exciting in that way. Just going back to technology versus insights, don't overestimate the importance of statistical methods either.
Yeah.
Have an idea of what sampling techniques are like and what distribution mechanics are, so you don't start to calculate significance on something where you can't really calculate it on, or you don't start to assume normality in distributions that are clearly not normally distributed. But be very careful with overestimating the extra insight that a very sophisticated statistical analysis is going to give you over a very simple significance test or correlation test. Right? This is important. But hypothesis testing, yes, it will mean that you have more ability to run hypotheses, or significance testing on hypotheses. You have more ability to run a wide range of existing statistical analysis on top of data. But remember, inference, it's there in cases where you have a subsample of your full data set. In most data teams, you've got the entire full data set at your disposal, so you can just count instead of infer, which is great.
Yeah, fair enough. I just think it's also interesting to just very quickly, and also being very reductionist, the moment that you understand when a model is good for data, and by model I'm talking more like statistical model, like why you shouldn't apply an R square here, and then you start digging like, oh, okay, concepts like multicollinearity or
Yes.
normal distribution or the residuals and stuff like that. That also makes you much stronger as somebody, because
As always, seeing the limits
Yeah.
of technology is really powerful. Yeah.
that's one area that I see quite a lot of data people falling behind.
Yeah.
As in, like, this is the average of this group and this is the average of that group.
Yeah.
But there is in reality much more into becoming good at research and investigation. And like you mentioned, I agree. People, if we're not that focused in technology anymore, we might be able to have some time and broadband to go back to things like becoming really good at business,
Yeah.
project management, and
Yeah.
even statistics.
Even statistics. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, just the plain fact of most KPIs are actually quite bad KPIs. I'll tell you
Oh,
that.
yes.
Yes. So average order value is a terrible KPI because it's an average of something that you actually really shouldn't take averages over because it's not normally distributed. So being able to push back against your stakeholders within reason and say, sure, I'll calculate AOV for you because that's the standardized metric you want to look at, but actually median purchase price, total revenue this week, median gross marginal volume, and so on is actually much more useful for you to look at than average order value, because it will be much more actionable because of all of these reasons, right? AOV is going to be really skewed because Joe from North Carolina has ordered about 20 grand's worth of goods this week in one order.
Yeah.
So your AOV is going to be massively skewed. Well, that's not useful to anybody, right?
Yeah, it's heavily driven by a few observations.
Of course. So knowing the limits of even your simple reporting is really important there. Right? And I think what was it again? I don't want to be quoted on this, but one of the most common BI tools out there. It took a while before medians were even an option in their simple slice and dice reporting tool sets, and that's bad. That's really bad one.
Yeah.
So that's the statistician in me speaking. Maybe also one interesting thing I want to get your thoughts on. What's the best
Sure.
place for these analysts in this new world where they're supposed to do more project management, more business analysis, more hypothesis-driven analysis? Should they still sit within one central data team together with these data engineers that just do plumbing and pipelining, or where is the relevant position for them in the business?
Ooh, that's very tricky, because in an ideal universe where there are no constraints, I always like the structure where there is one, in the current world, one data person, but in the future, one analyst, whatever domain it is, per big team in a company.
Yeah.
So like a marketing analyst, sales analyst, finance analyst, and so on. The problem with the real world there is I don't think companies have neither the money to hire all of those people. And even if they did, sometimes the market is like way too big.
Yes.
And then you hire these people, but also currently in most markets, senior analysts don't earn enough.
Yeah.
So it's always a race of having them for 1, 2, 3 years before they decide to become managers or data engineers or data scientists or whatever. So yeah, in an ideal universe, you have very experienced analysts in every one of the big domains in an organization. And those people are 50% technical, 50% domain experts.
Yeah.
In the real world, the market of experienced data people is not that big. Companies are not willing to pay them enough, so they transition to another position.
And it's difficult
And-
to execute. Yeah.
Yeah, and technology is so complex that it makes a lot of sense to become an expert in technology, like to be
Yes.
a Databricks expert without knowing nothing about any business domain is still a very reasonable. But
Yeah.
if technology would be easier,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
also would need to go back to a domain.
Yeah, I think domain knowledge, I mean, we keep coming back to it. You need to have the notions of domain knowledge. And that could be the business domain and the business you're working for, if it's a very specialized business, or it just could be, I'm great at marketing analysis, I'm great at product analytics. These are very different fields. So developing your niche as an analyst is really important. And I tell you what, I think the reason we have a business is because we come in as interim fractional teams, right? So we've got our analysts that are really specialized in marketing. We've got our analysts that are really specialized in product analytics. We've got our analytics engineers that are really great at information modeling, and we can deploy these people where they need to. So in that way, I think there's definitely a very interesting future for consulting there, of being able to not hire a whole FTE to do your marketing analysis, but just to tap into our resources or ZBS resources in order to get the insight when you need it and then not pay for it anymore afterwards. Right?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's very interesting. Information modeling is another bit, right? So thinking about the knowledge maps and the librarian as an idea here. I've always considered data modeling to be a necessarily simplified way of information modeling. Because at the end of the day, the reason we do data modeling in a data warehouse is not because of performance reasons. It used to be. The whole concept of star schemas,
Yeah.
it originated from the idea of
Snowflake
making
schemas and-
snowflake
yeah.
schemas, originated from the idea of making the performance and the compute manageable in a data warehouse, in a database. Compute is cheap these days, very cheap, particularly for most data sets that are relevant in BI, because you're not talking about terabytes of data per day. You're talking about at most a few gigabytes, and if you have more data than that, come talk to me, because your event tracking plan is probably not great. You are able to then switch your focus from a performance incentive to a, what's the best way to model this information so that my data model isn't just nicely architected, but also scalable. If I add another data source, how can I accommodate that without having to change my entire data model from scratch? It can be made as a static layer, so that if you swap out HubSpot for Salesforce, that you don't need to change all of your downstream reporting. And you can think about, well, what's the source of truth that I can build within my data model so that I've got a precise definition of what a user is. Does a user require a user ID and an email address, or just a user ID? Right. Important questions,
Yeah.
because if you don't ask them up front, you're going to ask them in analysis, because you're going to have discrepancies in your reporting. So our teams have already been working over the last couple of years on getting great at information modeling, and the sort of static target domain layer in the data model that we developed for that is quite powerful. But I think the inclusion of large language models, knowledge maps, and world context in there is going to make this even more critical.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you're not just limited to tabular structures anymore. You can actually create knowledge maps that contain the source of truth for the business in terms of entities, objects, relationship, context around all of that, and so on and so on. But that's not something that you can easily fit within a relational database. You can't easily fit it within Notion either, right? So
Yeah.
figuring out a way as a librarian, as a custodian of information context, on how to align on knowledge maps, talk about them with the rest of the business, and feed them into the analysis teams, that's going to be quite interesting. I haven't figured it out yet, but it's something I'm thinking of at the moment.
No, and the truth is, most of us just freak out when the information is not presented in a tabular way. But you have to remember, like, librarians literally do this for a living, and some of them are super smart people that have thought of ways of organizing, cataloging, and easily retrieving information.
Yep.
And sure, they use it for books, and maybe now they're a bit underappreciated. But once we start like picking on that knowledge and using it for like large scale organizations, for example, I've been in clients where you would do research, like very research heavy organizations. You would speak with a more senior person in the company, and they would be like, oh yeah, somebody already did that research and these were the conclusions. And you're like, oh, you should have told me this 6 months ago.
Yes.
That, by the way, happened during my thesis.
Well,
Like,
that's always great.
yeah. But I mean, it was still interesting. But the point is, a lot of companies are losing that synergy, and having that information very well cataloged would be
Yeah.
very valuable.
Yeah.
Thomas, we're running out of time. So just to conclude this episode, I would like to ask you, can you give the people listening some career advice? What exactly can they do to excel in data in the coming, let's say, 5 years?
Get great at understanding business context, and get great at communicating what you're doing. I mean, it sounds trivial, but honestly, the biggest skill gap in excellent technical data people, and yes, this is probably more prevalent in data engineering and analytics engineering, is the ability to communicate succinctly, clearly, and articulately to your clients or your stakeholders or your colleagues or your friends, damn it, about what you're actually doing as an analytics engineer or data engineer on a day-to-day basis. If you can do that, then you can start talking to your chief marketing officer in a way that they understand what your approach is, what they need to tell you in order to get the most useful insights out of the data team, for instance. So my advice has always been around that business value, that sort of trying to understand the context of what you're doing, but rather than say get a greater business value, I think get great at communicating what it is that you do and why you do it. Downstream from there, I think as an analyst, get great at deep analysis, hypothesis-driven analysis as well. And if you don't know what that means, there will be excellent introductions that you can even get via ChatGPT or Gemini that will introduce you to concepts of hypothesis-driven product analysis, hypothesis-driven marketing analysis, and so on and so on. And the third advice I'd give is, if you're an analyst, specialize in a niche, specialize in a subject matter domain that you can get really great at and be an expert at, because it will make you a better analyst. It will create a confidence within the marketing team that you know what you're talking about, and I think it will create a very interesting career tracks for you, because analysts are going to start hovering much more between technology and business over the next couple of years.
Perfect. Let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Thomas. It's been an amazing episode.
Thank you so much, Juan. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.